Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country, around the world, and inside the Ukraine, wherever you are, deep in the fight or looking to stay aware, I'm going to continue to bring you Ukraine War Report special episodes. And I had to bring back a returning champion, a recent guest of the show, but I think one of the most important voices in the country and therefore in the world on Ukraine right now. The great and powerful Congressman Adam Kinzinger is back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks, buddy. Good to be with you. You're way too kind.
Well,
Appreciate it.
let's start with good news. You had a baby, so
I
congratulations on
did.
the birth of your
Thank you.
son since last time. And I need to
Thank
be
you.
kind
And
to
you
you.
may hear him screaming in the background a couple times. We'll see. We'll see if we can keep it lively here.
Yeah, well, combat's nothing compared to having a newborn during a pandemic. So I wish you well.
Thanks.
But you're probably working off of 2 or 3 hours of sleep, and your son is now being born into a very, very different world than the last time we spoke. I want to cover the no-fly zone. I want to talk about American veterans inside Ukraine. I want to talk about what comes next. But I want to start with the big question. You are one of many who've been warning about the threat of Russia. Is this already war with Russia? Is this already World War III when a country has waged cyber attacks, has attacked our elections, and is now doing all the things they're doing? I have been critical of Joe Biden in not leveling with the American people about the stakes and the sacrifice to come. But in your view, are we already at war with Russia?
It's a good question. And I think kind of in the 21st century, you know, obviously when people think of World War III, they think of it's either going to be nukes or it's going to be, millions and millions and millions of people dead. I think if you look at the definition, I think a pretty solid argument could be made that we're in some version of that. You could also make the argument that there's, whole parts of the world that aren't involved in this. I do certainly think it's open conflict with Russia. I think Russia knows that. I think, to an extent, some in our government know that, but I do think we're in denial. Look, when Russia made the decision, in 2014 for Crimea, for the contested regions, and then obviously for what happened today, or a couple of weeks ago, it's clear they are not going to slow down. And I think this is the key: is yes, Ukraine is fighting for us. Ukraine is on the front lines for us. We hope Ukraine wins. But man, if you're concerned Russia's going to use a nuclear weapon, or you're concerned that they're serious about that, they're going to use it against Ukraine if they lose. So I think the sooner we can come to grips with the fact that, look, we have a crisis of confidence in this country. We somehow think of our military as equal to Russia. We somehow think of Russia basically as being able to destroy anybody they want at any time. In theory, they could. But do we just give them Europe then? Let them march wherever they want. This is what we have to grapple with. And I'm not sure the old Cold War talking points we've been hearing have been doing justice.
So that's exactly why I think we need to elevate your voice and disrupt the kind of groupthink that's happening, especially on cable news with the same group of wonks and analysts and retired generals who've been taking us, many of them took us into Iraq, led us through 20 years of disaster in Afghanistan, missed the prediction on Afghanistan. They're the same leaders, the same thought leaders, the same talking heads that are guiding this country's conversation, to include defining what war is. And especially for those of us who've been involved in war in the last generation, I think we define it differently. But let me ask you a related question I think is important. The authorized use of military force has not been repealed. We haven't declared war as a country in a generation. Is that coming? Is that part of what is inevitable? There's going to be a member of Congress who says, I'm asking Congress to declare war. Or are we going to just let Biden run this like we have for the last 20 years? It seems like a time where we have to push Congress to have a discussion about this in this moment, because there's never been a more important time to define the limitations of presidential power and maybe to redefine what war is. Maybe that's a way to get there. So do you anticipate a discussion about declaration of war in Congress? And if that comes, would you support it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I think a version of that will come. There's going to be people on the floor making comments. I don't think we'll ever get back to kind of how we think of it, like Congress will debate the merits of war or not. I just think at this moment, when everybody, and I will even include myself, when everybody in Congress is a foreign policy expert, they're a commander in chief. I just think it's almost impossible nowadays, with as quickly as things move, to actually debate issues of war and peace beyond funding. I wish there was a better way to do it. I wish we could, 500 of us basically put aside this, an attempt to get on TV or to do C-SPAN or whatever and have real conversation about. I just don't foresee that happening anytime soon. We can limit the presidential power, and I'm actually a big believer on this with the presidential power. Now, not necessarily in starting a whole war, but yeah, I do believe, to an extent there'll be people discussing it, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Not at all.
The question that I have, and I've been critical of, is what is Joe Biden's red line? Where does America stand? I think the world is questioning whether or not America will fight. We will go to the edge. We will go to the water's edge, whether it's Afghanistan or now Russia with an imminent evil threat. It seems like America wants to sit it out as long as it can, to include the discussion of a no-fly zone. So I guess the question that I continue to raise is, can we think more creatively? It feels like Biden is not dynamic enough for the moment. It feels like Congress is not dynamic enough for the moment. And maybe Putin's not dynamic enough for the moment. And maybe Zelensky is the one leader who seems to be dynamic enough for this new world of warfare. So when we come to the no-fly zone as an example, you and I have been advocating for it. Zelensky is crying for it. The Ukrainian people are crying for it. But there's simultaneously a lack of creativity. It doesn't have to be all of NATO. It doesn't even have to be the U.S. It can be anybody. They're asking for something to be done, and we seem to be arguing about the how rather than the what. So I guess the question that I have for you is, why do you support a no-fly zone? And where is this conversation going, where it seems like now we're entertaining redefining what it is, giving MiGs potentially to Poland and then not, right? Or helping Poland with MiGs and then not. We're jerking people around here. So the question is, why do you think there should be a no-fly zone? And if not a no-fly zone, what are the immediate alternatives that we can explain to the American people and enforce to help the Ukrainians right now?
Look, I think first off, a lot of the stuff leading up to this moment, the administration has gotten right in terms of, particularly some of the economic stuff that's important, et cetera, plussing up our troop presence in NATO countries. Here's the thing with the no-fly zone. I think this is important to put in context. We're not going to impose a no-fly zone over Russia. We're not talking about imposing a no-fly zone over Belarus. We're talking about at the invitation of the sovereign nation of Ukraine, who wants its skies protected at the request of its allies doing that. So from an international law perspective, this is not an imposition of anything. It's basically working with our ally to ensure their sky is free and safe. So what you get on the talking head circuit is this automatic jump to, and I don't want to minimize it, it's always a risk, but this automatic jump to, and you see it in Twitter, it's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea if you want global thermonuclear war. They have to put it out there in the longest description they possibly can. So here's the deal. Part of this, as you well know, is a different, people don't understand the difference between strategic and tactical nukes. Obviously, Russia has a context of escalate to de-escalate. To the use of tactical nuclear weapons. Is that a risk? It certainly is. But that will be the same exact risk, even a greater risk, if in fact Ukraine defeats Russia on the battlefield. Because then Vladimir Putin will make the decision, I will use tactical nukes. I will escalate to de-escalate, to break the will of the Ukrainian people. If you believe that Vladimir Putin, in response to a no-fly zone, yes, it may take taking out a SAM site or two of Russia if they light up and fire at these aircraft. Okay, that's what this is. But if you think he is going to take on NATO and the United States with nuclear weapons, using nuclear weapons, because at the request of Ukraine, we're defending their skies, then you have to assume he's going to do it to Ukraine anyway. But Russia has always had this thing where they threaten it because it puts the fear of God in all of us, and it works. And so what we've done by ruling it out, look, if Biden doesn't want to do a no-fly zone, that's fine. But leave it on the table. You don't have to say what you won't do. Because having the threat of doing something in many cases is the only way for diplomacy against an adversary to actually work. And then just quickly to answer the question, there are so many different iterations, from a humanitarian corridor protection to Western Ukraine to all of Ukraine. All of that's up in the open. But the idea that if we shoot down a Russian aircraft is going to lead to global thermonuclear war, that's going to happen on the ground in Ukraine anyway, if that's the case. And also, again, Turkey shot down a Russian aircraft, and all that led to was discussions between Putin and Erdogan in an alliance that lasted for a few years.
I think it's important to pull this apart and also understand you're a pilot who has flown in combat for the United States military. We are talking to a person of the next generation who understands the dynamism of this. You also understand the politics of this. And I think we've been challenged to find folks who understand both the military component and the political component. There are very few people that can understand both. And I think that has included the president, who doesn't seem to understand that Americans will tolerate higher gas prices if it's leveled with them. If you say to the country, this is going to be hard, this is going to be long, it's going to be brutal, and it will require sacrifice, and it will be worth it, right? It may take a long time. I don't think that leveling has happened. So when folks come back at me and say, by saying a no-fly zone, you mean you're okay with shooting down a Russian airplane? Yes. I am okay with that if they are bombing a bunch of civilians and they're blowing up a children's hospital, right, or if they come across the border into Poland. So I think you've been touching on this. We learned in the military, don't let the enemy control the tempo. Putin continues to control the tempo here, and this seems like a moment where we can shift the momentum. There is a scenario, what percentage likelihood we don't know, where Ukraine could win, where Putin falls, where Russia changes. That may take 30 years, and it may be a world where we've got loose nukes or unsecured nukes, where we've got nuke sites, 15 of them in the Ukraine, that are not secure. These are threats that are worth discussing. You and I both know that folks have come after me for that, saying it's alarmist or it's panic-inducing. I think that's scenario planning as a military person, right? Plan for every most dangerous course of action. So what I'm asking is, at what point does the American public, in your view, get leveled with where they understand that we're probably going to have to shoot at Russians, or they're going to shoot at us? Putin's told us he's going to do that. So are we going to wait for them to do it, or are we going to do it and control the tempo? I think that's the framing that is missing here.
I think that's a great question because, look, I don't think there's, as we're recording this, we just heard that they hit a maternity hospital, Russia, during a ceasefire. Listen, if you guys think that's horrific, just wait. I mean, just go with what happened in Syria every day, a new hospital bombed. That's how he's going to act. And look, truthfully, the most powerful person in a room is the one willing to commit the most violence. So if I'm not the biggest dude in the world. I could be in a room with somebody that's like 4'8", but if they're willing to stab me, they're more powerful than me. And I think that's when it comes to military stuff, how we have to see this. So Vladimir Putin has made it clear he has no problem with leveling, civilians. He's going to scatter them out of Ukraine. He'll send in conscripts and he'll do it, and he doesn't care how fast they die. He may care, but it's not going to mitigate him. So I think day after day of waking up to this, the American people we're going to have to do something, a no-fly zone. And by the way, every day that goes by, it becomes harder to do because there is more Russian equipment in Ukraine. There is more stuff. But again, the other thing is at least leave it on the table. When you think that you're, saving America's, fear by saying, oh, don't worry, everybody, no American troops will go in. Okay, maybe that'll make somebody feel a little better, but actually by leaving that on the table, you could prevent much, much more violence. And the last thing on this too, and the last thing from my, point, I'm not sure if I missed any of your questions on that, but we need to get past treating our military as if it is a precious kitten that at all costs should never be utilized and should always be protected. There's a reason we spend almost $800 billion on the military. There is a reason we have volunteers, because people choose to be there. I don't care if you even go in for the college money. You made a choice. And there's a reason we invest in gajillion-dollar fighter jets and body armor and vehicles. We want to protect people as best we can, but we expect that we may have to use it. Look, if we don't ever want to use the military, if using the military is the worst end state that we could possibly think of, not the destruction of Ukraine, but the use of the U.S. military, then I think we need to cut the military probably to 1/10, and we could just make them border guards. Because we don't even have to worry about an invasion in this country. I mean, we'll stop any invader, you and me, with our guns. But we invest so that we can utilize it when necessary.
I think that framing is important. This is a fight. We are already in the fight. The question is, what do we use in the fight? And we've got a gun closet full of resources that the whole world can see and the whole world wants, and we're locking the door. And I think, to your point, Biden saying, I'll never put boots on the ground, we'll never get into shooting it, right? He's boxing himself in too. Like, if that does happen and he gets caught on it, right, then he loses even more trust. So there's a question about trust and leveling and transparency where it feels like the disconnect we saw around Afghanistan, where there is a brutal reality of what's happening in a place, and the White House seems to be moving too slow, not leveling with the American people, not being aggressive enough when needed to prevent future death. Kasparov, the great chess player, keeps saying, easy is over. And I think those of us who've been in the military know that, and we're looking for politicians to level with us about that. And Biden in particular, I think he missed a 9/11 moment during the State of the Union to level with people and set the stage for what could be to come. But to that related point, Congressman, our brothers and sisters who are veterans are feeling the tug. I feel it. You probably feel it. This feels like the good fight in a way it never was when we went to Iraq and Afghanistan. Maybe like my grandfather fought in World War II for 3 years. There are now veterans who are there, who are on their way, who are signing up. But there's a part of this, again, that I don't think Biden is calculating for. What are they going to do to them if they're in the IRR? If you're in the individual ready reserves, you're a drilling National Guardsman, and you go over and you get in the fight. Kirby was asked this the other day by, I think, Tom Bowman from NPR, and he punted on it. But this is happening. Thousands of Americans are going to volunteer to fight. And then there are all the other angles of what could happen with propaganda value if one is captured. You know, if Zelensky decides to elevate them to try to pull America more. I feel like this is a forward edge of the fight where our skin in the game is getting ratcheted up. What do you think here on this? I mean, it's hard to tell how many, who's there. But from a DOD standpoint, what are they going to do when more and more of our brothers and sisters go because our government's not in the same way they did in Afghanistan?
It's so interesting. The parallels to the interwar period or the pre-war period in World War II are so amazing to me. And that doesn't mean every parallel is accurate or everything that happened in World War II happens here. The fact that Russia right now is bogged down and paying a much heavier price in Ukraine could lead to them being less likely to attack NATO territory, Moldova, Baltics, because we've obviously seen the Russian military is not as capable as we thought. Okay. But you also see in World War II, there were Americans. You just have to watch Pearl Harbor and you can see it. Ben Affleck, there are Americans that went over to the UK and fought basically as Americans, under the British flag, basically. And you're seeing that here. Here's the interesting thing. So as a reservist myself, I would not go because, again, I still have guard responsibility. I have AT responsibility. I still fly planes, etc. As on the inactive ready reserve, I have a hard time seeing how the military can prevent people from going. The inactive reserve, you're basically there on paper as a reservist, but you have a right to basically do anything you want. And I think it's something that, they're going to have to wrestle with where we could be doing a lot better, where the administration could be doing better, is where you see this tug on people to go and fight and serve in the International Legion, which would be kind of cool. I mean, honestly, if I was single, it would certainly tug on me to go do that. But there are ways I think we can do it that would actually be beneficial. So if the United States, for instance, gave UAVs to Ukraine, and then we basically had this International Legion of former UAV pilots or sensor operators that actually maybe could operate out of Romania or Western Ukraine. If you had, people that maybe skills in law enforcement and they could go alleviate people in Lviv, Ukraine, and do law enforcement stuff while those police forces who actually are fighting in combat would forward deploy to the east. I think there's ways we could do that with more official help, but I don't know. It's interesting. I'll tell you, it certainly tugs at me.
Yeah, but there's a stunning lack of creativity. And again, I go back to the 9/11 moment where, in my view, Biden's State of the Union was like Bush saying after 9/11, go shopping. There is no question of shared sacrifice. There's no ask for sacrifice, and there's no options to serve. And I think that's where they're missing an opportunity to actually help Ukraine. We all wanted to do something in Afghanistan, and we were told there's nothing you can do except watch it all burn. And we found friends who had NGOs, and we helped get people out, and we created the Digital Dunkirk. That Digital Dunkirk is now shifting over to Ukraine. Right? And they're not just door kickers, they're cooks, they're medics, they're people who want to do humanitarian work. And the White House is failing to provide those men and women with a way to help. So what can Congress do? For you as a member of Congress, I feel like you and others who are both sides of the aisle, this is an independent Americans moment where I think especially the veterans in Congress seem to look at it differently, seem to understand it differently, and maybe can help push options forward that are different. You can be more aggressive on cutting off the oil, but maybe you can ask people for ways to get involved. If the president doesn't do it, what do you tell your constituents? What do you tell your buddies in the Air Force who want to help that don't just want to, donate to a Venmo account?
It's a great question, and I mean, one of the best things we can do in that case is on the PR side and come up with creative solutions. Alexander Vindman's the one that mentioned to me about possibly sending the UAVs and some of the international Legion to go operate them. I'm like, brilliant. Those are kind of ideas that can push forward. I think an important point to make. You brought up Afghanistan. So I think it was October or November. I got the briefing from state that said this attack on Ukraine was going to happen. I'll tell you, I've been in Congress 12 years now. I have never once seen the intel community be so certain of something. And that's why, they obviously did a great job, I think, in putting that out early and kind of, cutting off Putin's misinformation. But I did ask this political appointee, high-ranking political appointee in state, did the withdrawal from Afghanistan have anything to do with the timing? And he said yes. We believe that Putin believes after Afghanistan, there is a permissive environment. Okay. I'm not saying that to just point at Joe Biden and relitigate leaving Afghanistan. I think the point to make, though, we left Afghanistan because we were just tired of doing it. Right. I don't think there's anybody that believes we ever would have actually been defeated there. We were just tired of doing it. Okay. And again, we can have different opinions on whether we should have left. It's not to relitigate that. But I think what's obvious is when you take what seems to be the easy decision. The easy decision at the time was to leave Afghanistan and be done with it. Sometimes you see worse things come as a result. I'm not sure, but I would be willing to bet greater than 50-50 odds that if we didn't leave Afghanistan, we would not be dealing today. We would not be dealing today with this war in Ukraine. Did I get choppy on you? You got
no. That came through lame at Charlie. That's a provocative statement. That's the one that folks are gonna hear. And I think those of us who look at these types of situations.
It's not a blame. It's not blame.
No, but I think it's
important to think
it's
through.
It's a truth, right? If you sit out the last fight, there's going to be a question about whether or not you get in the next one. That is a real thing to ask. It's a responsible thing to ask. But here's the question that, especially for the veterans who listen to this show, I have to ask you. There was no accountability after Afghanistan. Not a single person in the U.S. government was fired, resigned, and all the same people from Jake Sullivan across the Pentagon just got rewarded with another war to take on, right? So how do we, what do you do as a member of Congress? And how do you approach that when we go into really the next phase of this global conflict era with exactly the same people who fucked up the last one? Like that's what outrages, I think, especially veterans, that there were massive failures. We all see it. Biden wants to put it in the rearview mirror. But now it's coming back up for obvious reasons. So will there ever be any accountability for failure in the administration on Afghanistan?
Probably not. No. I mean, look, it's nothing was likely done criminal. I think, the administration is eager to put Afghanistan behind them. What I'd like to see, honestly, is a whole new tranche of kind of foreign policy thinkers and experts come forward. I do think, look, we can disagree on whether we should have gotten into Iraq and Afghanistan in the first place, but that was kind of a new generation of thinkers that had new ways of fighting war, new ideas. We have the same people. And now with Russia, we're recycling Cold Warriors. When we were up against the Soviet Union, we did not want to provoke the Soviet Union because they were our equal. That would be World War III. Russia is not the Soviet Union. Russia's not as capable. It's a different thing. But if you're stuck in your 1985 academic theories, then of course you don't want to go head to head with Russia, because it's basically everything you learned about the Soviet Union. That's why we just need new generation of thinkers, hawks, doves, whatever you want to call them, new generation of people that can think outside of the box. From Congress, it's members of Congress and the Senate with new ideas. It's also staff that come and work. And I always encourage members of Congress to try to empower your staff, because they could be either the next members of Congress or they could be the next person in the White House with new ideas. And if you empower them, you give them that kind of opportunity to grow in how they think. And the other thing is, like, look, some of the toughest people that actually have a hard time adjusting into politics are people that come out of the military, partially because they come out and you're used to giving an order and it's followed, and now you have to start kind of massaging people's feelings. But people that come out of the military, I think, have a great deal of on the ground understanding. Foreign policy, like it's broader than the use of the military, but it is important to know how that affects the military.
To that point, the way this is unfolding creates political challenges, but also political opportunities, and it puts veterans in the front and center, as veterans who are pilots, veterans who are political mavericks, front and center in a way that it wouldn't have if this didn't happen. There is a scenario where the Democrats lose the House. Biden, either loses to Trump or someone else. Putin has bogged us down in something, bogged the world down in something, and waits us out, right? Gets us in a quagmire, gets NATO in a quagmire, gets Ukraine in a quagmire, and waits for political change to happen in the United States that becomes more favorable. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. If it's Biden and Trump, and Ukraine is still waging, and it's a full-blown insurgency like we saw in Afghanistan and other places, does this make you more likely to run for president as an independent or as a breakaway Republican of some kind?
Yeah, I mean, if those were the two choices, it would certainly make it more likely. Again, nobody believes me, but I'm not eager to seek this out, but it would make me more likely, because Joe Biden's a nice man. I disagree with his policies. Donald Trump's a terrible man. And in my mind, I would vote, if I wasn't running or there was no other option, I would vote for Biden now before I would vote for Donald Trump, because I think Donald Trump was dangerous to the Republic. We have since seen it, particularly on foreign policy as well. But yeah, I mean, it does make it possible. And I'll tell you, it's interesting because I get called a warmonger all the time on the Twitter sphere, and I hate war. You hate war, right? Sometimes, though, we understand that intervening before it's cool to intervene can make something go quicker. I was the first. I even beat John McCain at this. I teased him about it. I was the first member of Congress to call for bombing ISIS. I was called in fact, I got the nickname, which is kind of cool. It's Adam Bombzinger. But, I got the nickname of all you want to do is start a third Iraq war. Well, 6 months later, it was the cool thing to do to fight ISIS. But guess what? Had we done it 6 months prior to that, they would have been killed in the cradle. So I think being able to look forward on world events and predict where things go and hope you're wrong. But I think that is going to be important in whoever the next president is, not managing the day-to-day politics, not worrying about your reelection, but actually looking steps forward and saying, where do we need to move these chess pieces, similar to what we did in the Cold War? I think I'm good at that. And I don't say that braggingly. I think I can notice where things are going.
It opens up a space for you, right? If we were just talking about COVID, it would open up a space for someone who is a doctor, right? But given the way this is unfolding, it opens up a space for you. But last time I asked you, you told me you were going to see. But I want to ask you, the Republican Party has gotten worse. Now there are some in the Republican Party that seem to be echoing Putin's talking points. It's not peacetime anymore. Now it's wartime. The stakes are even higher. And the problems and erosion and disintegration of core within the Republican Party has gotten more urgent. So are you going to stay in the Republican Party? If this right now, I mean, do you wake up every morning and say, hey, this is it. I've had enough of this shit. I'm going to leave and start something else or go somewhere else?
I wake up every morning and say, hey, I've had enough of this shit. I mean, it's like.
But are you gonna leave? Like I asked you last time, and you basically told me you would leave if Trump got the nomination. But now things are accelerating in a different way. Is there something else that will get you to leave this party?
Look, there may be a day. There very well may be a day. It's not yet. I want to see. I have some new born-again anti-Putiners in the party now that we'll see how long that lasts. They're anti-Putin, but they're going to actually go after Joe Biden more than Putin. But look, I'm really disappointed in my party. From now, I'm still in. I think it's important from what I'm doing on the January 6th committee and politically to remain a Republican for credibility. But my patience isn't infinite. It's something I truly do think about almost daily. You know, is there an alternative? It's obviously very difficult. But even if there never is an alternative, even if we're stuck with the two-party system for eternity, there is going to be a point where it's just obvious the Republican Party of today is the Republican Party, but for now, it deserves some battle. It deserves a
Well,
fight.
I'm rooting for anybody who's fighting against Putin. I'm rooting for anybody who's supporting Ukraine. I'm rooting for anybody who's trying to disrupt the broken political system. And,
Yeah,
I keep saying this on independent Americans, especially, we're looking for people we can root for who are challenging the status quo, disrupting the groupthink, and especially on the most important issues of our time. So, you're a voice that I think is so critical. I'm grateful for your time and for you pushing it, man. Like, we need you out there shaking shit up and asking hard questions and just forcing this, especially in the media, the groupthink to be disrupted. On national security issues in particular, we need new ideas. We need more ideas, not less ideas. And I appreciate the fact that you continue to bring that forward, and I hope you'll continue to do it in the days to come.
well, thanks. By the way, thanks for your leadership. Thanks for putting this stuff forward because I had a lot of people reach out after last time I did it, and you've got a huge voice. And I'll tell you, let's just take quickly in closing that no-fly zone issue. Regardless of whether you agree with the no-fly zone or not, I do think it deserves way more discussion than just saying, "Oh, you mean you want global thermonuclear war?" Because that then puts you into the Soviet box, and we know containment is not working against Vladimir Putin because he refuses to be contained. These are necessary discussions. Even if I'm wrong on the no-fly zone, I'm willing to be wrong, but we have to think outside of our box.
And let's also put a point on it. Zelensky and most of a country of 40 million people are begging for a no-fly zone. They're not all morons. They don't all want nuclear
Yep.
war either. And the oversimplification of the no-fly zone, I think, is unfortunately a reflection of the oversimplification of so many things in this country, and particularly around war. Those of us who've been in war know that it's not black and white. We know it's all gray, and there is, easy is over. I think especially in times like this, easy is over, and we need leaders who can explain that complexity and challenge the status quo, and you're doing that, man. So thank you for continuing. I hope you'll come back again soon. Congratulations on the baby. It's an amazing thing, and I will tell you as a father, I can feel it already changing your leadership style.
Oh,
Right?
thanks, man. It's awesome. I thought I'd not hate babies, but like hate the diaper thing and whatever. I still don't like diapers, but having a baby, man, when it's yours, it's like God does something that just changes your whole kind of like outlook on things. So it's pretty cool.
It's all different, and I think that's the one thing I'll leave people with. Remember, I said this in an episode recently, nukes and kids. That makes everything different about this situation. That's how high, and the children are the things that those of us who've been to combat will never forget. Seeing kids die, seeing kids wounded, and that's what we're seeing, and that's what we know is coming. So I appeal to everybody as a parent to try to connect with the Ukrainian people on that level and think about what it would be like if it were your children. There are people like you, Congressman, who have babies and they're in bunkers right now hoping that a bomb doesn't land on them. And that's the kind of personal story component that we've got to help the American people understand, especially those who've never been to war.
And by the way, let me say too, because I get hit on the Twitter because they don't know I'm actually in the military. Like, you're so eager to send other people to war, but not go yourself. I'm like, wait, hold on. You must not do your research. But look, my son's name is Christian. I don't want him to go to war, but I also want to make sure if he's in the military that he has the best equipment. And if he goes, it's for what it says behind you. It's for a righteous cause. And I think something like this is a righteous cause. If he was fighting for, Putin's army and it was a land grab, it'd be a much, much more hollow reason.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your continued leadership. Thank you for all you're doing to move this country forward. I hope you get some sleep in there. The only guy getting less sleep than you right now is probably everybody in Ukraine. But
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for juggling all of this and for keeping the flame going. Stay vigilant, sir.
Yep. See you, dude. Take care.
Thanks.